stream. We have a very special live stream today. Well, first of all, anyone who's watching, please let us know in the chat where you're watching from. We would love to hear. We already have Natalie from Texas and Kelly is here. So just drop us a note and say hi. So today I have Heather with me. She is from Nutrisense, and I would love to just get kind of your backstory, like how you got involved with Nutrisense and kind of personally how you've used Nutrisense yourself, like your own blood sugar journey. And then after that, we can get into blood sugar Q&A and dive into all the stuff, blood sugar and keto and all that.
Yeah, awesome. So thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone. There's so much to talk about on this topic. So I'm a registered dietitian. I've been with Nutrisense for a few years now. So around the time that we started is when I joined. I've seen a lot of growth in the company over the years, but I've worked with thousands of members at this point. So I've seen thousands and thousands of glucose data examples for every case you can imagine. But before I came to Nutrisense, I was actually working in an integrative private practice setting. So I was specializing in neuroendocrine conditions, a lot of women's health stuff. So chronic fatigue, I would see a lot of so-called adrenal fatigue, right? I worked with a lot of those folks, a lot of women with PCOS, endometriosis, a lot of weight struggles, just kind of everything neuroendocrine. So that's my background. As far as blood sugar specifically, I would say that blood sugar is such a huge part of metabolic health that it's just been a constant theme, not only throughout my own health and healing journey there, but in the work with all my clients, both before Nutrisense and then during Nutrisense. So before coming to Nutrisense and before having access to the CGM technology, I was still working a lot with blood sugar management, but it's been great to see the added benefit of just the CGM data, because this was very much a black box for me previously in my clinical work. It was like we could do a lot, but there was a little bit of guesswork, and we had, the finger stick glucometers that we could use, but we couldn't see that real-time data. So that's just been game-changing, having access to that.
Yeah, for me, for sure as well. Just getting, I like to say it's like having a video versus having like one picture.
Totally.
And it's
I
like,
love that analogy.
yeah. And so it has been very eye-opening. And I have found that just if I like take my blood sugar in the morning and have just that one number, it doesn't even correlate to the whole picture, because like I could have one number in the morning and then my blood sugar be up and down all day. And then I could have the exact same number the next morning, but then my blood sugar's steady all day. And it's just night and day,
Totally.
even though you have that same exact number. One thing that stuck out to me that you were talking about is the adrenal fatigue and the fatigue.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of, especially women, deal with fatigue. How have you seen that, people kind of addressing fatigue in other ways and then finding out that it's really a blood sugar issue? Is that something that's common?
Well, so this is a really interesting topic. I mean, we could probably have a whole session just talking about this idea of adrenal fatigue or chronic fatigue. So I see that blood sugar is both the chicken and the egg, if that makes sense. So yes, we see blood sugar imbalances leading to fatigue or worsened fatigue, but when someone has these deeper dysregulations in the neuroendocrine system already, what it does is it sets you up for more blood sugar imbalances. So it's sort of like this feedback loop that you're stuck in, where you're more prone to blood sugar imbalances because of these underlying conditions, but the blood sugar imbalances themselves come back and worsen those same conditions. So it can be a very tricky kind of trap to wiggle out of.
Yeah, I feel like it's similar with maybe foods that cause blood sugar dysregulation. Like you have some sugary treat to like get your energy up, and it not only causes you to crash later, but it causes you to want more of that
Yes.
stimulus, and then you're just in this loop. And sometimes like it's really powerful when you break free from that and kind of see how you actually feel without that kind of thing. It's amazing.
No, that's a great example because that's that same kind of cycle. I see that with stimulants too, like caffeine. And if we're relying on those things because we don't have a really healthy, balanced foundation, metabolically, we can feel that fatigue and we're just trying to get through the day. So we rely on these stimulants, but they pull from your bank of reserves. They're not actually giving you energy. They're sort of tricking the body into working harder with the limited resources it already has.
Right.
And so you're reactively more fatigued on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like a loan, like you're borrowing, you have to pay it back.
Yeah.
Really. So that makes me think, I'd love to hear your thoughts on caffeine and blood sugar. How have you seen those two interact?
Okay, so this is also going to be a great segue for the other stuff we want to talk about today with like the non-food things that can influence glucose. So I love that you asked this. So what's interesting is caffeine can be linked to all kinds of different hormonal changes that can themselves indirectly impact glucose. So, for example, we do see that caffeine can cause cortisol, which is our main stress hormone, to kind of rise a little bit for some people. So if that's happening for you, then you may or may not see your glucose rise after you drink caffeine, but you may see a chronic elevation throughout the day as a result of kind of a lingering delayed effect on your cortisol. So a lot of people think that they can just drink caffeine and take a look at their glucose and see, okay, did my glucose spike? If it didn't, then I'm fine. Okay, wrong.
Yeah.
Because
Short-sighted view.
yes, you need to back up and get a bigger picture of those glucose patterns over time. And one of the most common things I see, especially for people who are already kind of sensitive to that stress overload effect and that elevated cortisol in their body, or just cortisol dysregulation in general, I see that they may not really ever have a spike or a crash with their caffeine, but they'll have a chronic elevated average glucose or fasting glucose. And we'll do experiments where we take a little caffeine holiday, scale down very slowly, not cold turkey, and no cold turkey, that's stress.
Yeah.
We want to lay off that.
Right.
So scale down slowly, take about a 2-week break, and it's incredible what I see with the glucose response. Yeah, for a lot of people, it'll drop down. I had one woman, I worked with her for a long time, and she was just absolutely struggling with getting her fasting glucose down and getting her overall average glucose down. And her doctor had diagnosed her with prediabetes. She was on a super low carb diet, like extreme low carb. She was doing everything by the book, like she thought she should, to get her glucose down. Lots of intense workouts, and this glucose was not budging. And I was like, okay, you need to trial this caffeine break. And she took a break, and we saw her glucose drop average 15-point drop in her average glucose. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that is amazing. I love those tools, like things to try. And a lot of people get a little overwhelmed, like when they start to make lifestyle changes. Like I have to do all of it at once. I have to do all these extreme workouts. I've got to cut all the carbs. I've got to cut out the coffee. And it's like there's so many things you can like add on slowly. And so like if you're at a place where you're stuck, like this lady obviously was, it's like try, this is another thing that you can try. For me, I found that I would rather cut other things out and have other lifestyle changes than cut out the coffee.
That's everyone though. That's everyone. It's so funny. It's like the thing you're dreading the most to cut out is sometimes,
I
but
know.
sometimes it is just a matter of resetting a few things. Like I've worked with a lot of people who they were so scared to take a break from the caffeine because it was such a ritual. It was such a part of just a lot of things they enjoyed and loved, but also they really did worry they needed it for energy. And when they were able to kind of take a step back, focus on more of those foundational fixes, they were like, caffeine, what? Like, I don't even care. I don't even want it anymore. And so I think it's often something good to consider that the mindset or the way your body, the state your body's in now could be different than it would be on the other side of experimenting with something. And your cravings and the things you feel you need might totally change in that time. So I like to keep an open mind, but I also like to approach everyone with this experimenting mindset. So it's not saying because someone else had this happen, you will too. We don't know. You might not, and it might be something else. So really just being open.
Yeah. And the only way you're going to know is if you try it.
Got to try.
Yeah.
And you try it, and what's the worst thing that can happen? You don't find any success, so you try something else. And I think that's totally fine.
Yeah. I love that. That's a huge theme on my channel. Because I'm not a doctor or an expert, or I'm nothing except a mom, and try to do my best for my own health. And so I always say, it's like, I'm just bringing you along for my journey. And if you go back in my videos, you'll find me trying things that I'm not, currently doing anymore, because it was good for the time or it wasn't good for the time. And it's just, I move on and try something different. It's always like tweaking and changing. And then at the same time, our bodies are always changing. So even if something did work for me 10 years ago, it may not work for me now. And so there's just this constant progression. So I always say, if you want to come along on the journey with me, feel free, but I'm not offering you like, this is, I'm doing this, so this is this prescription of what you have to do. Anyway,
I love that. And I love your point about the body changing over time. I would say if there's one thing that I tell people across the board all the time is that what worked for you last year may not be working for you now. What works for you this week may not work next week. And the best thing that when I work with people, I say the best thing I can offer you is a formula for how to discover the answers as they change through the years. But I will not give you a prescriptive diet. I will not give you a prescriptive, this is exactly what you need to do, but I can give you the formula for how you can listen and interpret what your body's telling you and apply that to how it changes over time. And that's really the only thing that's going to be sustainable.
Absolutely. And I love CGMs as a tool in here, because for myself, I got to the point in my diet where I was very restricted in the types of foods that I ate. And I got my first CGM through Nutrisense, and I expected that I was going to eat my regular diet and pinpoint things that I was eating that caused me problems so I could restrict my diet further. What I found was actually the opposite. I was surprised to see that I was doing very well with the foods that I was eating. And so I started experimenting with different foods, and it actually expanded my diet, which that was mind-boggling. And it was like things where someone else might have a completely different reaction to the foods than I did. Like I found that beans actually didn't hardly raise my blood sugar at all. And I know that some people who, maybe have diabetes or they're very, very sensitive to carbohydrates, they can't even touch that kind of thing. But I was like, well, for me, they actually, and it almost seemed like they caused my blood sugar to go down on average. I was like, what? I
have an idea about that.
With that.
Yeah, no, I love this. The idea of loosening up the restrictive approach being able to kind of give yourself permission to include more foods that maybe you thought were going to be off limits because they were going to wreak havoc on your blood sugar. But, coming into this topic too of what are some of the non-food glucose influencers, sometimes when I work with very strict keto or very low carb diets with people, you see that people actually are dealing with glucose that is creeping up and up and up because of a stress response from carb restriction. Now, this is something that happens for some people where if you are someone who, because carbs do modulate cortisol to some extent. And if you have good glucose tolerance and you have good insulin sensitivity, and let's say that you are maybe doing a little bit more intense workout, you can actually see glucose spike higher as a result of a stress response because you don't have the carbs to buffer that fuel need. And so what will happen is the introduction of carbs strategically in the right place and time and combos will actually lower your glucose and keep you more stable in some cases. And it's very different from what people might think.
Yes, we always want to have like this A plus B equals C mindset. Like carbs cause higher blood sugar, therefore we just lower the carbs, it will exponentially lower the blood sugar.
Yeah.
And it turns out that the body is just a little bit more complicated than that. And so so with my audience, a lot of them are keto and even as far as carnivore. And this is something that I have talked about before. I did a video a while back about how carbs can actually help lower blood sugar, just like what you were saying. And I always get responses from people saying things like, I'm diabetic, and so this isn't true, or, because I can't eat carbs and keep my blood sugar down, therefore this shouldn't be true. And like you said, if you're metabolically healthy, I think you said metabolically healthy, and you have a good blood sugar control.
Yeah.
That's when the carbs can be healthy. So I just want to say, like, if someone is dealing with diabetes and, they have these sky high blood sugars, then maybe that's not the right tool at that time for that person. So just wanted to kind of put that out there.
Yes. And you know what? I want to add to that because I have a really cool story for you guys. And so I was working that illustrates your point, but also goes a step further and introduces a really interesting idea. So I was working with a guy who he was a type 2 diabetic, and he had been diagnosed I think probably 2 years ago, a year or two ago. And when he came to Nutrisense, he had already been on a very, very low carb diet, total keto. He was even monitoring ketones. So like he was in ketosis, and he was doing one meal a day. He was doing super aggressive HIIT workouts 6 or 7 days a week. So he was doing one meal a day, fasting for like 22 hours, 7 days a week, HIIT workouts. And he could not get his fasting glucose below 300. And he was freaking out. His doctor, like he really, really didn't want to do medication. So he obviously was very motivated to make the dietary changes, and he was doing everything he thought was right. He was like, I'm fasting. I'm only eating one meal a day. It's super low carb. Like I'm doing everything. I'm working out so intensely. What is going on? And we talked, and I said, listen, you are stressing your body out. And we see actual research, okay, that there is such a thing as stress-induced diabetes. Okay, you can give yourself diabetes with stress. Now, this is a real thing. Now, in his situation, it's not necessarily that stress caused his diabetes, but it was contributing to the fact that he couldn't regulate his now diagnosed diabetes. And so he had so aggressively just attacked this like I've got to bring my glucose down, that he'd thrown the pendulum in the far other direction. So I finally convinced him to trust me. Let's keep you low carb, but let's increase the meals through the day. You need to not fast so long. And I got him to shift to 3 meals. We shifted to an earlier eating window as well. Okay, I'm not kidding you. And I have used him for case studies so many times with my colleagues at Nutrisense. His fasting glucose in 3 days dropped down to the 120s. He was at he was in the 300s for months and months. That's why he came to Nutrisense. He's like, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
I need to get this down.
Yeah.
And within a few days of lowering that stress level in his life, from eating more frequently, lowering, like I said, chill out on your HIIT workouts for a little bit, like chill out, eat a little bit more frequently. We can keep it low carb, no problem, but let's do these other things. And he saw such incredible results from that. He was like, I can't understand. This is different from what I've been told. I was told fasting was going to cause my glucose to drop. And I was told like more and more exercise was going to help my cells use that glucose and improve my insulin sensitivity. No. And that's why I always tell people you have to stay out of the extremes, right? Because the extremes are stressful on the body, and stress is metabolically unhealthy. Stress is going to be a disaster in high chronic levels for you, for your glucose and so much more.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting how it's like there is truth to what he said about fasting lowering blood sugar. Like there is a nugget of truth there, but it's like you said, the extremes. It's like there's a U-shaped curve, and if it's too far one direction, too far the other direction.
Yes.
That you want to have a sweet spot, which with our bodies isn't that, I mean, they're always looking for that sweet spot, and blood sugar, I think, is the perfect example, because I mean, even in the keto community, there's this idea that sugar is poison. And you're like, but wait a minute, your body has to have blood sugar. Like, obviously you don't want too much, but if you don't have it, you'll die. Like, how can it be poison if it's essential for life? And it's all about finding that sweet spot, that balance.
Yeah.
We had a question in here. Let me put it up. Opinions on berberine for insulin resistance from Kel.
Yeah, so I actually just wrote an article about this. With I should find it and throw it in the chat here if I can. So let me just search for it.
If you tell me what it's called, I don't know that if you're able to put a link up or not, if YouTube will let you, but I can put the link up.
Let's see if it'll let me. Okay. It might not let me, but it's just the Nutrisense article that says the title is berberine a substitute for Ozempic, or essentially like a natural alternative to Ozempic? Because as we all know, we've been hearing about these weight loss drugs, and a lot of people have been wondering if berberine can kind of act as a substitute, because they share many similar kind of cellular mechanisms in terms of how they work. But as far as berberine for insulin resistance, we do have some research that shows it can be helpful for improving glucose tolerance. What I always tell people about berberine is sort of like if you are making a cake and you've got all the ingredients that you need. Berberine is like the little bit of frosting on the top, right? What makes the cake is all this other stuff going on. So is berberine going to be part of the cake, right? You still have some icing on your cake. It's part of the cake, but it's not significant enough. We need to look at those other ingredients. Okay, so we need to look at your diet as a whole. We need to look at these stress levels, where stress is coming from, how that can be impacting you individually. And then berberine is sort of like the little dusting on the top, right? Can we use this to shift things or help shift things? Maybe for some people a little bit, but I don't like to rely on it as a first line. There
Right.
are other more foundational things that we really need to look at first.
So you're saying I can't just take berberine and go eat donuts and expect my blood sugar to be fine?
Maybe you have tried.
That's disappointing.
Speaking of the cake, I just eat the cake and then I take some berberine, right? It's all works.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Hello to everyone who's saying hi in the chat. Hi, Blaze. Hi, Cindy. Hi, Dustin. All of the wonderful regulars are here. All right. So we have already kind of talked about keto and blood sugar and how less carbs doesn't always equal lower blood sugar. Let's see. Let's talk about like if someone is on a keto diet and they are, what would be some things to look for? Because a lot of people do thrive on a keto diet, and they can keep their blood sugar very, steady, even when eating zero carbs or very low carbs. So, but for the people who maybe aren't thriving, what are some things to look for? And then how would you recommend, like what kind of tweaks would you recommend starting with to lower the blood sugar when just reducing carbs hasn't been the ticket that made it work?
Yeah. Great question. So I would say, first of all, none of this stuff, these questions about how many carbs, should I eat carbs? Am I someone who doesn't do well with any? None of these are mysterious questions. They are so easy to answer. And all we have to do is know what symptoms in the body to look for. The CGM data is helpful, but we really need to use that in conjunction with those clinical symptoms. So let's come back to the first question. How do you know, first of all, if your approach is working well for you? If your keto approach or any other approach is working well? Well, okay, if your energy is feeling good, excuse me, if your energy is good, if your sleep is good, your digestion is good, your mood is pretty stable, pretty good, right? Your hormonal balance is good, all the proxy markers we have for that. So for premenopausal women, it would be menstrual cycle regularity, it could be libido, it could be a lot of different things that we look at for that kind of hormonal balance assessment, but that piece is important. And if your glucose is looking good. Now, if you're checking all those boxes, you're doing great, but if you aren't, or if there are any of those symptoms that I just mentioned that are problematic for you, then it's really time to take a step back and understand what could be causing that. So the reason I picked those symptoms, those are going to be the best compass to assess your metabolic health, but more importantly, your neuroendocrine health. So the neuroendocrine system is a fancy term for your stress response system. It takes your nervous system and your endocrine system, your hormones, and it combines them to help you adapt to anything you have going on in your life. So it's a stress response system that you have in your body. And the symptoms of health or imbalance in this system involve your energy, your sleep, your digestion, your mood, and other hormonal markers like we're talking about. We can also include things like if you struggle with any kind of body pain, musculoskeletal, chronic body pain like that, like a fibromyalgia type or a little bit even less. That can be something to pay attention to, but all of these are symptoms of neuroendocrine health or dysfunction. So if you have any of these going on, what it tells me as a clinician immediately is your stress response system is not working right. Now, why is it not working right? Your body has a very simple equation, and it runs by this equation every day of your life, which is the demand that you place on the body. So demand, same thing as stress, pressure, has to be equal to the reserves that you have to support that demand. What does that mean? If I'm running a marathon, I need to be able to have the fuel, the proper nutrition to support that workout. If I'm really expecting any kind of physical exertion or daily activities of life, I have to have fuel to support that. Number one thing impacting that equation is poor nutrition or nutritional imbalances. And it's because if you're lacking any of those nutritional fundamentals, those nutrients are actually used to form the building blocks of what runs the whole neuroendocrine system. All those little enzymes that work. Actually, I have a poster back here that shows a lot of these. But if you are struggling with fatigue, struggling with poor sleep, right, there are actual biochemical imbalances often going on as a result of the demand you're applying to your body is exceeding the reserves that you have to support it. And taking a look at those nutrition foundations is number one most important thing to actually address a stress dysregulation.
Yeah. Okay. That's fascinating. So number one, nutrition, like we were talking about, we have different tools and we can kind of build, we don't have to do everything at once, but we start with nutrition.
Yeah.
And we kind of get that dialed in. Then what? What's next? If we've already, got the nutrition piece and we're still not, because there's a lot of people who swear by these different diets and they're like, this diet fixed me. And
you might not have the nutrition piece down as well as you think you do. If you aren't, the proof is in the pudding, right? Yeah. If you aren't feeling well, I've got news for you. You may not have your diet as dialed in as you think you should. So a lot of people, what worked for them last month or last year, and they're saying, I felt great when I started it. My glucose was improved. All my fatigue went away. But now suddenly I'm regressing. I'm gaining my weight back. I'm not sleeping as well. I'm doing the same thing I was doing. Why is it not working? Or they assume that because it once worked, it will continue to. And that is a dangerous assumption because, like we talked about, the body changes over time. So just because something worked for you at this time doesn't mean it's optimal right now. And if your body is showing signs of that stress overload, you need to work with someone who's qualified to help you do a deeper analysis of your diet and then to help guide you through experimenting. So your question about what do we experiment with, where do we start? It's really helpful to have professional guidance because otherwise you're going to spend a lot of extra time and waste a lot of extra time, trial and error, where because I, for example, work in this field and work on these experiments with everyone all the time and have seen this for a long, long time. I can take someone and be like, okay, based on your health history, based on your symptoms, based on your current nutrient intake and your glucose data, here are the top 5 experiments I think will benefit you. Let's start there. Yeah. And that can save you a lot of time. So I think working with someone who already has that expertise is really important because self-navigation can drive you crazy sometimes to try to figure out what's up and down
in there.
Yeah, we all have. Yeah,
and we all have different biases. For me, talking about coffee earlier, it's like there's this little voice in my head that's like, you need to try giving up coffee again. And I'm like, no, I don't think I do. I don't think that could possibly be my problem. And so that's where having someone outside of yourself, being objective and not having those biases, that can be very helpful to be like, I think you do.
Yeah. And it's always just fun to, I think, treat it like a fun science experiment and not like, oh God, here I go. I've got to go take out this thing I love. It's more like, wow, what would happen? I wonder, if I went without this for 2 weeks or if I did this other thing, because I think it's always important for everything that we're maybe afraid to try, I think it's always important to play devil's advocate and think about how cool would it be if I actually felt better than I feel right now on the other side? Like that would be pretty cool.
Like it is possible. Yeah. All right. So let's see. I had a question in my mind and then it left me. So we wanted to talk a little bit about things besides food. Um, like you talked about the guy that was doing everything
Yeah,
right.
my diabetic guy. Mhm.
Yes, everything right, and he even continued with a low carb approach,
Yeah.
but what he changed were more lifestyle things. What are the big lifestyle changes that you see that really impact blood sugar?
Yeah, well, what I'll say is probably the most helpful framework for all of this is just think of the top, the headline is stress, okay? And what counts as stress? Because for him, it wasn't a matter of breaking up things into diet, lifestyle, this or that, as much as it was saying what counts as stress and where are you spending a lot of that currency. So what counts as stress? Dietary imbalances, nutritional imbalances is one. It is also exercise that you're not tolerating or not well conditioned for or not well fueled for.
Hmm,
That's a stress.
yeah.
Another one is, of course, poor sleep, which can itself be caused by these other stressors.
But there's a lot of, like, circular
A
things
lot of
here.
that.
They feed into
A
each
lot of
other.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the fun part of a system, right? A
Yeah.
system, we're very back to that U-shaped curve. It's non-linear, so there's a lot of integration happening. But yeah, so nutrient imbalances, workouts or exercise that you're not tolerating well or not fueling well for. Another thing is supplements, medications, or food intolerances. Now, this is a huge one that I think is very underappreciated, especially with supplementation, because one of the number one things I see is people are over supplementing or they're not supplementing to tolerance, individual tolerance. And so when you take a supplement, a lot of people think, well, if a little bit is helpful and I feel better, then more is better. And I'll just keep taking it. And then they feel improvement for a little bit, and then it drops off and they backslide. And they're like, what happened? Well, your supplement dose was back to that U-shaped curve. Maybe you needed a little push, but you pushed too much. And now you're causing the same problem to happen with excess.
Hmm.
And so I think being able to assess whether or not your current supplements and medications are dosed appropriately for you is huge. And very, very underappreciated as a stressor on the body. The other one, yeah, would be if you, of course, we think of our classic psychosocial stressors, but unfortunately, I think those are the only things most people think about when they think of stress. They think, I got in a fight with a loved one. I had a really exhausting day at work. Like, I've got a deadline I can't meet.
Yeah.
We think of these psychosocial stressors, and that's what we think of as stress, but stress is so much more than that. It's really anything that is putting a pressure on your body. And can you meet that demand? Can your body adapt to that? If not, it's going to become a cause of imbalance and chronic illness eventually.
Yeah. So one thing I like to think about with the stress thing is there are things that we can do just to lower stress, but then we also at some point have to become more resilient. Like you talked about not
Yeah.
tolerating exercise well. It's like, well, how do you don't just say, I don't tolerate exercise well, so I'm not going to exercise. It's too stressful.
Yeah, there are two sides of that equation, right? It's the
What?
demand, but it's also the reserves and how you're building the body up and what it
Yeah.
has in the bank.
Yeah. So one thing that I've really been focusing on this last year, rather than just, reducing, as far as stress, it's like, how do I build my body to be more resilient? Because, we live in a world where there is stress. Like I have kids, like they cause stress. And how do what kinds of things do we do to build that resilience?
Yeah.
And obviously there are times and places where you just do need to reduce stress and you kind of have to figure out, is this a stress that I need to reduce, or what are some other tools to actually build that resilience?
Yeah. Well, that is a really good question. And I always say too, all stress is not bad.
Like
Stress, if we
exercise.
think about a pressure, it's just really a pressure being placed on the body. And we are exposed to pathogens at a young age, and that's stressful on the body, but it trains our immune system to be stronger in the future. And similarly, load-bearing exercises are stressful, but if we get the right dose and the right frequency, they strengthen our bone mass, they don't break you. But if you do more than you can handle, you will have a broken bone. So it's back to finding that center, pushing and then coming back, pushing and coming back. I am a big fan of pulsing things, rotating things, coming in, taking a step back. Yeah. So my biggest kind of general answer to that question would be build in your diet, build in your workout, whatever it is, whatever part of your life, make it not homogenous, make it not constantly one way. Come in, take a break, right? Do a lot of different types of physical movements, some maybe more aggressive, some much more kind of restful or stimulating of the parasympathetic nervous system. We're talking about like gentle stretching, wrapping that into a bigger picture of conditioning with workouts over time, and not just doing this one thing relentlessly. With diet, it means not eating the same thing every single day, 7 days a week. It means rotating foods, taking breaks. It means, you know what, try different eating and fasting windows. Don't do the same thing all the time. Give your body some room to flex and adapt, and then evaluate those symptoms as you go. So how you'll know if you're pushing too hard or if you're doing something in a way that's exceeding your body's ability to adapt, because you're going to feel worse. Your fatigue is going to get worse. Your sleep is going to get worse. All of these markers that I talked about, these easy symptom markers that you can go and check off, they will tell you. And if you're headed in the right direction, those will get better. But if you're not getting better, you're not heading in the right direction. Your current approach is not working. Yeah. So for people who say, I have a great approach, but I still have these problems, no, the approach isn't working. It's time to change.
Yeah. Okay. I love that idea of cycling things and pulsing things. That's something that I talk about a lot on my channel because, well, it seems to align with just how we are as humans, like seasonally eating seasonally, that different times of year, there would be different types of physical work that we would do, times that are, we're resting more, times that we're active more. And I think that just makes sense. And there is this idea that I need to find the perfect diet, the perfect exercise routine. And then I do that every day for the rest of my life because it's perfect. And it's like, oh, but actually just doing the same thing, it ends up not being perfect.
Yes.
It looks perfect on that one day.
Yes.
If you keep doing it, it ends up not being perfect. And so I do that. Yes. I do on my channel, different challenges and, mixing things up. And I do it like as experiments, and I tend to like, find something that works and, bring it forward and then try something else. And so I'm always like learning and changing, but at the same time, I'm not, the end goal is not to find the one thing that I do forever. It's to find finding a pattern of eating and workout rather than just
than the workout itself. What you're saying. Yes. It's the pattern. Totally. It's like it's more about finding that principal pattern and less about the specific thing. Yeah.
That's very cool. I love that. Okay. So you talked about having some kind of a professional or someone outside of yourself helping you along. And I think this is an area where Nutrisense really offers something unique because CGMs are becoming very popular these days, and you can get them from your doctor. There are all kinds of avenues to get them now, which I'm so excited about because it's such a valuable tool. But one thing that Nutrisense offers is the dietitians through the app. And for myself, I went into it with a laser focus on the food. Like, let's find out all about the food. Let's test.
Get those demonized foods out of here. Yeah.
And my dietitian saying, do you do any kind of like mindfulness or what's your exercise like? And I'm like, wait, what? That's
Yeah.
not what I'm here for. So like I would love to hear your thoughts on, well, I mean, we've already heard how you think it's helpful for having someone, a professional outside yourself looking at the stuff. Like, how do you see Nutrisense with that, and how do they fill that kind of a need?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, what drew me to Nutrisense in the first place, because I had come out of over a decade of like really intensive private practice integrated. My bar was high in terms of the quality of care I wanted to give people, the level of personalization. I don't believe in generic stuff. I don't believe in canned dietary prescriptions. I don't believe in any of that crap.
Mhm.
So, I wanted to align myself with a group of people who had similar values in that way. And so all the dietitians that we have registered dietitians and we have certified nutrition specialists. So both of us are board certified and licensed in nutrition. And we are trained in clinical nutrition. We're trained in all the basic biochemical fundamentals. We're trained in motivational interviewing. We're trained in a lot of things about behavior change. So it's not just about, hey, let's analyze your diet and tell you what's wrong, as much as it's about, let's look at diet, let's look at your schedule, let's look at your lifestyle, let's look at how you breathe and how you move, and then figure out what's going to work for your life as an individual to see improvements over time, and doing it in a way that is sustainable, doing it in a way that doesn't make you feel too overwhelmed. So even though sometimes a lot of this stuff can feel very overwhelming, especially if you've got lots of things that need to be addressed about your health concerns, we want to help you break it down into a manageable process, because it is a process. And so that's really where I think Nutrisense can shine. Like, we really do partner with people for sustainable success over time. We're not trying to give you like a quick fix fad thing that you can run off and
This is all your problems.
exactly solve everything. Like, we're really in the trenches with you, and we get down and we work through these problems. And I think that it's also one of the main differences between Nutrisense and like a lot of the other CGM companies, January AI, Signos, Levels. They don't pair you with a personal dietitian. They're not pairing you with someone. Like, for Levels, you're able to I think access what they call like their nutrition marketplace, but you're paying private practice prices to work with people who are contracted through. So like with Nutrisense, we're part of the company where you get a month free complimentary support from your personal dietitian when you sign up for any program. So you already get a full month of our time complimentary. And I can say, like, after being in private practice, in what you charge in private practice versus what you pay as a member subscribing to have that dietitian support at Nutrisense, it's a steal. It is a total steal.
Yeah, I
So
totally agree. Because any way that you get a CGM, if you're paying for it, it's an investment. It's an investment in money, and it's an investment in time. And especially when you're first starting out and you're not experienced with that kind of data, there's a limit to how much you can get out of
yeah,
it. And yes, adding the dietitian support and going through Nutrisense costs more than maybe, just getting it through your doctor. But if you need that help to understand the data, I think it's extremely valuable to have that input, and like just have someone holding your hand through it and giving you ideas, throwing in things that just never would have occurred to you. Just super helpful. So that's probably like my favorite thing about Nutrisense, is that they have that support, and that you can just come in with very limited knowledge, just as a patient, like patient level of knowledge about it, and you can just get so much value in your 2 weeks or your 4 weeks of using a CGM.
And even if you come in and your glucose looks great, because I think often a lot of people think, well, if my glucose is great, there's nothing here to do. But we actually work with a ton of people who have glucose that looks great and they're still struggling with weight, or they're still struggling with other things, because glucose is only one part of metabolic health. It's not the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I always tell people, like, we're a metabolic health company and we use CGMs, but we also have all of these other assessment tools. As trained dietitians, like, we're able to bring in all of these other assessment tools to help you. So the CGMs are great. They're great. But if you come in and your glucose is looking awesome, or you've done all the glucose experiments you want, but you still have symptoms or you still have issues, there's so much more we can do. I've worked with a lot of people who ended up transferring out of the CGMs and doing just a coaching only program with us, which we do offer as well, because they had moved beyond needing the CGM, or they had done what they needed to, or they exhausted that particular avenue for themselves, but there were a lot of other things they wanted to work on. So we opened up this other path, another program with our coaching focus. So
that's really cool. I wasn't aware of that, but that makes total sense. And for me, I've gotten to the place where my blood sugar is pretty good, but I'm still holding on to 10 or 15 pounds that I'm like, I'm going to have to, figure out how to deal with the stress. And so I love that.
Yeah.
I love that approach. Like, it's very holistic.
Yeah.
And
I always say, like, the glucose data, it can be challenging to interpret. Like, I always want to make sure people don't make mistakes when they are trying to interpret it. Like, one of the biggest misconceptions, you probably have heard this a lot too, is like any little spike or any little elevation is like, people freak out and they're like, I need a flat line. I'm like, no, you don't. No. So that's one of the mistakes that can happen if you're not familiar with the science of glucose regulation, or if you're not familiar with some of these things. You can look at this data and not really know what's good or bad, and we can help you figure that out. We can help you, in some cases, not freak out.
Yeah, I love that. All right. Well, we are coming up on an hour here, and let's see, was there any other questions? Let's see, Dustin from Keto Simple said he's talking about, pulsing things and trying different things: fasting, BBBE, carnivore, removing coffee, removing dairy, adding electrolytes. Yeah, that's the only way to do it. Like, you gotta keep trying things and seeing what works. Cindy. Okay. So Cindy says that she found do you know what BBBE is? It's beef, butter, bacon, and eggs. It's a carnivore diet variation. Anyways, slept better than ever after doing that. Doing carnivore this month, and am getting back. And am back to getting good sleep. So it sounds like the carnivore thing is really helping you with your sleep. That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to have a link down below for Nutrisense. I am an affiliate with Nutrisense, and so I get a little kickback from anyone who clicks the link and adds their email for more info. So if you want info about Nutrisense, feel free to click that and head down there. It has been very enlightening. I love this conversation. I feel like we hit so many important topics. And it ended up being very holistic. It started about, but it's like, I feel like we hit so many different things. So thank you so much.
Oh yeah, it's the thread that starts to connect to everything. But yeah, this has been great. I'm sure we could talk for hours.
Seriously. All right. But I will let you go. Thank you everybody for joining. And be sure and leave comments, like, after this video. If you're not watching it live, if you're watching the replay, you can leave comments down below, and we can try to answer any other questions you might have. So thanks so much for joining. Thank you, Heather. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone.